Okay, today I'm going to be talking about the short story Through the Tunnel, which is by Doris Lessing. This is just going to be a quick, pretty basic review just to go over a lot of the main points for you. The first thing I want to talk about when we talk about Through the Tunnel is the setting. Lessing uses the setting to really convey a lot about the story. Um, the first thing to notice initially is that it is a foreign place to Jerry and his mother. However, they've been there before, so it is this foreign, familiar place. So it gives us this element of familiarity, but at the same time this questionable and different place. He doesn't speak the language. He's called a foreign English boy. So we can guess from this information that while it is familiar, it still is kind of a frightening place for Jerry. Another important feature to notice is the way he discusses the wild bay versus the safe beach. The wild bay is where the tunnel is, and the water is choppier there versus this really safe beach where his mother is, where the younger children are with their parents, and it is much safer. The description that he uses, especially when discussing the wild bay, is very jarring, I would say. Sharp, jutting, these red-brown rocks, which almost describe the color of dried blood or rust. And once he gets his goggles and actually starts swimming underwater, he describes the sea as a different world. He talks about the really gentle sloping of the white sand under the water and the colorful fish. And, it is a different existence for him. Eventually, he goes on to call the wild beach his beach, which I think is very interesting because by this point in the story, he's embraced the wildness of it. And I think that's indicative of his place in life. Since this is a Bildungsroman Roman story, it's indicative of his transition into adulthood and his embrace of that kind of wildness or that kind of unknown. And the description of the setting for the menacing of the tunnel is very vivid, especially once he's traveling through it. We get these sharp rocks that are cutting or bumping the back of his head, and he sees, little bits of light to give him hope, and then there's this pitch black pit at the end, and it is a very menacing and frightening description, and it's very detailed. Next, I want to discuss Jerry a little bit. Jerry, it's important to keep in mind, he's only 11 years old, so he is very young. For most of us, that's about 6th grade. We're just beginning to become aware of adulthood, I guess, and the inevitability of it. And it's really interesting because Jerry feels very guilty about abandoning his mother. We know she's a widow and that there isn't this male presence, and so because of that, they're kind of partners, and they have a really nice companionship, and it's a very strong companionship. And so he does feel guilty about abandoning her. We know Jerry's a good swimmer. His mother says that several times. What I think is interesting is how Jerry reacts to foreign boys when he sees them go through the tunnel and he thinks they might be dead, and he kind of panics and he ends up crying, and the boys just kind of leave. It tells us a lot about Jerry and his youth, that he's willing to cry in front of these boys and that he's so upset by not being accepted by them and being frightened by what happened. I think it's interesting that he continuously checks on his mother, and that kind of is that safety blanket analogy there that, at the end of the day, he's always going to look for his mother and make sure she's there and she's safe and that he can see her. When he demands his goggles, I think it really we come to a moment for him where there's a sense of pride now. He has this determination, he's determined to do it, and it has become a matter of pride. He's not going through the tunnel to prove anything to anybody else, but to himself, and it is a very prideful thing. I love this description of Jerry, and I think it's very interesting that this is that of an 11-year-old. He looked down into the blue well of water. He knew he must find his way through that cave or hole or tunnel and out the other side. And again, when we're talking about this is a kind of allegory, if you will, for growing up, it's very similar to this concept of, we look into our future and we see that, we have to get through high school and maybe university, and we'll come out the other side as adults and mature people. And so Jerry can see this kind of menace and see what he has to go through in order to become a man, so to speak. Next, I want to talk about the mother. We know she's a widow. It says she often gives this apologetic face. And from this one little detail, we can actually tell a lot about the mother and how she feels about Jerry not having a father figure. She's clearly sad that she can't provide that kind of male influence. at the time this was written, it was still very important to have a male influence in your life. I mean, it's still considered important today, but even more so then. We're talking about, some sort of father figure, somebody to, teach you how to be a man. And the mother is very sorry she can't provide that for Jerry. She clearly worries about babying Jerry, but also worries about not taking care of him enough. And as the solo parent here, she strikes a very difficult path of, trying to find that equal balance. Obviously, she worries about Jerry pushing himself too much. He gets the bloody noses. He's pale. He looks sickly sometimes after training, I guess. And she notices, and it does worry her. But again, she has to walk this very fine line of, I have to let him experiment and strike out on his own, but I also have to make sure that he's safe and cared for. So just a quick review of the plot. Again, this is a foreign but familiar place. Jerry wants to be on his own, but he wants protection of his mother. They go to the safe beach the first day, but he has this longing to go to the wild beach, and he ends up there and seeing those foreign boys going through the tunnel. Once he decides to get through that tunnel, his determination is really quite inspiring. Again, for an 11-year-old to decide that they're going to go through that tunnel purely for their own pride and their own goals, and surely through his own willpower, he's able to do it. And the journey through the tunnel, I highly recommend rereading it because it is a very powerful piece in the story, and especially when he's counting, and he loses track of the numbers, and he repeats the same number 3 or 4 times, and it's a very jarring moment to have him say, this is it, I'm dying here. Somebody will have to find my body when they swim through this tunnel next time, and it's a very heightened description. And then finally, once he's gotten through the tunnel, this proud moment that he has to share it. Especially as a young man, he wants to share his accomplishments, but he can't tell his mother what he did because she'll probably be furious. So he confesses just a little bit of what he's done to her. So in this way, he's letting her in, but there's still very clearly this new distance between the two of them, which is indicative of this building throne type story. Next, I want to talk about the relationship for Jerry and his mother, because the nature of it does change drastically. At the beginning of the story, he feels this need not to leave his mother alone. He feels this guilt by abandoning her, but also this security that he finds in her. And he doesn't want to lose that. Because again, at 11, he's still very much a young child. By the middle of the text, we have this kind of teenager mentality, I'm going to hide what I'm doing from my mother, and she'll just get mad and tell me I can't do it. And then by the end of the text, we have almost this adult-type mentality and outlook where he can share part of his success with her just like an adult would, but they don't need to know the gory details of what he's done to accomplish it. So we do have this very much shifting of relationship. And finally, I want to address some of the themes that are really played out here. Definitely the question of pride. Why does Jerry feel the need to do this? It's not like the foreigners are going to find out. It's not like his mother will know the extent of what he's done. So there is this question of him being very prideful. The security of youth versus the danger of adulthood is very much played out here. He talks about his mother and looking for his mother and seeing her yellow umbrella on the beach. And that's definitely a source of security for him. However, there is something to be said about this danger of adulthood. And he says in the story, if I don't go through the tunnel today, I'll never go. So he acknowledges that there are risks to this kind of becoming an adult, but they're worth taking for him once he gets through that tunnel. And then, of course, the nature of changing relationships. Because he does grow up throughout the course of this story, the relationship he has with his parent changes. And he knows that it won't be the same again, and that there is this separation. So it does change very drastically, and as a parent, I think it's a little bit sad, but I understand. So there you go. That's Through the Tunnel. If you have any questions or concerns, let me know. Otherwise, I'll see you in class.